Hello, storytellers. I am really excited to bring to you symbolic consciousness and why we crave stories. I'm coming from Story Weaving Media. We are a consultancy on storytelling, telling more moving, creative, deep, real, transformative stories so that we can make the world a better place. That's what I'm here to help with, and I'm honored to have you watching today. So, stories have symbols. You might recognize some of the symbols that I'm going to talk about, like a gun, a Bible, a ring, father, mother, shoes, a pen, a cat, a dog, a hamster, a child's toy. There's so many symbols that we recognize from life that have profound cultural meanings. And oftentimes those cultural meanings also feel like personal meanings, right? A gun might have a personal feeling attached to it, but it's because it has a cultural feeling attached to it also. It's going to mean essentially the same thing throughout culture, even if it also lands with an individual. So there's cultural aspects and there's individual aspects. Each of these symbols that I mentioned is codified with cultural meaning. So that means that these symbols can be arranged in some kind of context and arrangement which either expands the freedom, the safety of the psyche, the psycho-emotional state of a person, or it can contract the psyche. It can make someone feel less safe. And this arrangement of these symbols is what we call a story, of course. We're all familiar with movies, radio, songs, podcasts, poems. There's so many formats of stories. And if I just tell you, I went to the store and I got chocolate milk and it was bad. That's a story. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? There's stories around us everywhere. And the way that our emotional system works, we store unconscious stories, unconscious meanings about things. And so by making the unconscious conscious, by shedding light in the darkness, we are maturing ourselves. Our conscious awareness is becoming more and more capable of dealing with or accommodating the darkness. A symbol like a gun, for example, has a lot of darkness attached to it. It has a lot of get away from me energy, or it has a lot of I can't stand this anymore energy. But if you think of a symbol like a pear, it's pretty benign, right? It doesn't have that kind of darkness or tension associated with it. If there was a film about a killer pear, that might change. But in general, I've actually seen a film about a killer tire. So things can change, but it's funny because it's using a cultural symbol that doesn't have darkness attached to it, and it's implying darkness upon it. So, these things can change. But when you have these stories that can expand or contract the psycho-emotional state of a person, the consciousness of a person, I would call those that contract the state of a person immature stories. These are stories that come from trauma. These are stories that come from unconsciousness as storytellers. And, there's a thing called transference in therapy, in the world of therapy. When a psychologist, therapist is projecting something or making assumptions or diagnosing their patient, and they're not conscious of their own stuff. They have some unconscious trauma that is being transferred over to their patient. This is called transference. And this can also happen as storytellers in storytelling, filmmaking, whatever it is. If the storyteller has some basic assumptions about the world, which are founded in trauma, that can be transferred over to their audience, and then they're not going to have a very good time because why don't I feel good watching this movie? Well, because the storyteller transferred their trauma onto you. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's forever or it's going to stick. Maybe it's just one of those movies. I turned off a movie the other day because I was like, this is just too much. This is like the amount of trauma that's coming through this movie. I'm over it. So I said no, because it just didn't feel right. I didn't need to process that storyteller's trauma for him. It just didn't feel right to me. But some people, if they're in a traumatized state, if they're in an immature state, will accept these stories that really don't feel good. And, cultural conditioning might say, push through it, or might say, this can affect you. But just because we have that idea doesn't mean it's true. Storytelling is often something that affects us very deeply. So if immature stories come from trauma and can transfer trauma and create trauma, that means that mature stories can actually resolve trauma. And that is, at story weaving, that's our area of specialty. And that's what I'm talking about today. So how can a story resolve trauma? Basically, if we take these symbols that have been codified into collective consciousness and we use these symbols to become more self-aware, to see our shadows, to accept ourselves. For example, if somebody in a film, I said gun, father, shoe, cat, in some of the symbols I mentioned earlier. If those could be arranged in a way that's immature, like the father takes the gun, puts on his shoes, and kills the cat and leaves. It's a tragedy, right? And exposing ourselves to tragedies can be it can help us feel something, but if the character isn't later redeemed, then the person watching the movie or consuming that story might lose hope. They might become jaded. And this is not going to make for a healthy society. So the goal here is we can recognize that tragedy exists, right? We're not about being in denial. We're not about pushing away what's uncomfortable, but follow that father's journey in the example story I just told you, and mature storytelling will reveal the humanity within him. It will reveal the goodness within him, even if he, I don't remember what I said, but he killed the cat, I remember. So he's going to have a conscience about this. This is going to be weighing on him. And then if the mature storyteller follows that story and continues to reveal his heart and reveal his maybe regret, remorse, and reveal his humanity, it can take the storyteller, the viewer, on a journey of empathizing with somebody who they would normally deem as a bad guy, or they would normally pathologize as a lunatic, or whatever it is. But being able to empathize with somebody you don't normally empathize with is a trait of mature storytelling. So I have some notes here. I'm just looking at this. So I have storytelling replaces life experience. And it doesn't necessarily, maybe I wouldn't say replace, but it supplements life experience, right? Because if you see somebody, if you're considering becoming a competitive hot dog eater, right? Like, this seems really interesting to me. I think I could do this. I think I could win. And then you see somebody do a competitive hot dog eating contest and they get sick and they like, I won, but I feel awful. And like, okay, I'll take my trophy and then I'm going to like go vomit over here because like I feel terrible. Well, maybe I don't need to do that anymore. I kind of am learning my lesson through osmosis from somebody else's story. I don't need to live that story. I can learn from the other person's mistakes, essentially, right? So stories replace or supplement life experience. And they give us a sense of what could happen if I do this, or what would happen if I try that. And so immature consciousness, which is, nothing's wrong with immaturity. Children are immature. That's just the nature of a seed has to grow into a sapling, into a tree eventually. That's just the order of life. So we all have aspects of immaturity within us. There's the narcissistic phase of childhood, which is until about 3 years old. And so any parts of us that are still emotionally stuck there are the narcissistic wounds within us. And so whether an adult with a narcissistic wound, which, it shouldn't be a taboo thing, virtually everybody has some aspect of narcissism within them, some tension holding onto, I don't know how to get my needs met fully. That's all that the narcissistic wound is. It's not a negative thing. It's an immature thing, like I said earlier. So whether it's a child or an adult with an inner child that needs to learn how to get their needs met, immaturity craves stories. Immaturity craves life experience, not realizing that some life experiences are dangerous in the sense that they can be traumatizing, right? So, if I've done my own things that were dangerous and traumatized me, and I had to then resolve that trauma, which, is its own valid path. But if we can learn lessons without the need to get traumatized, that's usually preferred. That's usually better, because we don't need to be traumatized to learn lessons. That's sort of a fallacy in the tragic human trauma cycles. We don't need to perpetuate trauma cycles, right? We're resolving trauma cycles so that we can be kind and then raise kind children, and then they're kind, and then they can raise kind children, right? We don't need to perpetuate anything else. This is how humans are meant to be, and we're outgrowing the re-traumatization of each other. So that said, some movies, for example, horror movies, I would call are feeding on the audience, because they come from a storyteller's narcissistic wounding, and that wounding is attempting to traumatize or scare viewers, and even the viewers might like it. I'm not saying the viewers don't like it, or the viewers might crave it themselves. There's definitely a market for horror movies, but I would still look at horror movies as traumatizing. The imagery that's in horror movies is, I would call it unnatural. It's so you might live through a horror movie. It might be a terrible murderous rampage or whatever it is, and so somebody gets that imagery inside of them, and even though they've never seen a murderous rampage, they have seen a screen which depicts a murderous rampage, and then those images are then in their consciousness, and it's as if they have seen one. So horror movies, things like that, can be very traumatizing, especially with children. And as we know, most people don't let children view horror movies or view inappropriate material, because people know that would be traumatizing for them. And they tend to think, oh, this person's an adult, and rated R, what is that, 14 and over, then there's NC 17 and over, like, as if a 40-year-old can see a horror film and not be affected by it, right? It doesn't make sense, because there's still an inner child, there's still tenderness. The 40-year-old isn't like, a suit of armor around them. They still have a heart, and exposing ourselves to this kind of stuff, I just don't recommend it. But that's besides the point. The point is, the symbols used in a horror movie are going to create a collapse of the nervous system, a taxing of the emotional body, the psyche, and then somebody will emerge from a horror movie, even if they're in denial about it, they're going to emerge more afraid of the world and more protective of themselves. Even if it's not founded in reality, they're going to be more protective of themselves after seeing a horror movie. And what we need is a world where people let their guard down, people are allowing themselves to be vulnerable and open with each other. Of course, not with everybody. There are some people who are just going to take advantage of vulnerability. But when you find kind, loving people, or if you create kind, loving relationships, vulnerability is what we're here for. This is the point of being on earth, is to be open and be loving and let ourselves enjoy our lives, right? And if we're not vulnerable, we can't enjoy our lives. Enjoyment is a very vulnerable sensation, emotion. So that's about all I wanted to say today. I really appreciate you listening. I mentioned that Story Weaving Consultancy helps create soul-stirring stories that permanently move people, change people, mature people. And if this is something that you're looking for help with, I'm hoping we're going to be able to release a course soon, an online course that will be able to reach more people. If you have any questions, you have any video requests, let me know. My name is Joshua. Thank you so much for watching, and looking forward to seeing you next time. Take care. Bye.